Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and we are going to be talking about interest group bonuses. In this video, we're going to first briefly explain what is an interest group bonus, how do you get it, then we're going to explain which interest groups are best in the abstract, and then we're going to talk about which interest groups are best practically speaking, as well as go over each bonus for each individual interest group. Once we do that, we're going to briefly talk about how do we make the interest groups like us, which is essential for getting their bonuses, and then we're going to talk about how do we increase the clout of the interest group, because the interest group bonus is contingent on clout. So let's get into it. So first of all, every one of your interest groups has 3 traits that you can unlock by having various approval rating with them. If you have -5 approval, you'll unlock the malice, which will give you a negative effect. If you have a +5 approval, you will unlock the first bonus, which gives a positive effect, and then if you have +10, you will unlock the second one that gives a, generally speaking, much better bonus. Now, there's a third way of looking at it, and if you are -10, you will also radicalize the interest group, which has a cascading variety of negative effects, which is more kind of under the branch of like radicalism. Okay, so in order to achieve this bonus, you need to have your interest group be either in the government or in the opposition. That is to say, they cannot be marginalized. An interest group will become marginalized if they drop below 4% clout, and they will demarginalize if they get above 5% clout. I'm pretty sure these are the numbers. The numbers, if they are powerful, what you will get is you will get this triangular square thing you got going on here. And what this will do is it will double all the bonuses and malices you achieve. So we see that we are currently getting tax avoidance with the Industrialists. This is normally a -10% manufacturing tax income, but since their clout is above 20%, it's doubled. Now, you only need to get above 20% in order to get them powerful. After that, you just have to stay above 18%. So it's theoretically possible to have 5 interest groups powerful at one time, with having some above 20% and some just above 18%, this sort of thing. Let's get into the bonuses, and very quickly I'm going to rank which ones I think are best in the abstract, and then I'm going to talk about which ones are best theoretically, and then also go into the interest groups, in like more detail, or into the bonuses in more detail. So in the abstract, I think the best group is trade unions, followed by Intelligentsia, followed by rural folk, followed by the church, then the Petite Bourgeoisie, then the Industrialists in 6th, the armed forces in 7th, and the Landowners in last place. Practically speaking, I think the trade unionists are best, the Industrialists are second, then the Intelligentsia, then the rural folk, then the armed forces, then the Petite Bourgeoisie, then the church, then the Landowners. You'll notice some of those are exactly the same, and some of them change quite a bit. Notably, the trade unionists are the best in both cases, and the Landowners are the worst in both cases. Let's get into their bonuses and talk about, practically speaking, why they're the best or the worst. So the trade unionist bonuses, first of all, let's talk about their malice. Although in ranking them, we are mainly focused on the bonus, we can still talk about the malice. -30% straight construction efficiency. Since the good way to think about your GDP growth is just how much construction you have, construction efficiency malice is actually particularly bad. This is a really bad one to run. The industrial organizers gives you 20% manufacturing industries throughput. This is a huge bonus. This allows all your industries to be more competitive on, the international market if need be. And also, when you have higher industries throughput, this allows you to have a higher standard of living while still producing the same amount of goods, which allows you to attract migrants. Since migration is such a powerful mechanic in this game, this will allow you to push migration, especially when combined with their third trait, their second bonus, depending on how you want to look at it, workforce ratio. Workforce ratio increases the number of workers who are currently working. If you take a look, you'll see gainfully employed versus dependents. Now, my understanding is this operates on an equilibrium, so this will change the equilibrium. So you won't just suddenly get 20% more workers, but instead the equilibrium will change, and your population will gradually develop more gainfully employed relative to dependents. Normally speaking, the normal rate, you have 25% of your population will be gainfully employed and 75% will be dependents. You'll notice here that is very much not the ratio here. That is because we have a variety of things giving us plus workforce ratio. So this bonus is really strong, this bonus is really strong, and combined, this makes the trade unionists the most powerful interest group in the game, and they're also relatively easy to empower once you start developing, you know, a little bit and start getting, you know, the people powerful. They're hard to develop early on, so early on, you're not going to rely on the trade unionists, but somewhere in the middle game, you know, maybe around the 1860s to 1880s, depending on which country you're starting, when they start to become powerful, you'll want to lean into them a little bit in terms of what you're doing. So this interest group is great. Next up, we have the Intelligentsia, who were ranked 3 theoretically, I believe. No, wait. Theoretically, I had ranked them as 6, but practically speaking, I ranked them as 2nd. And the reason for this is the Industrialists are really, really important as an interest group for passing a bunch of laws that are really powerful, and empowering them early allows you to move away from the Landowners, which are the worst interest group. And so, generally speaking, these guys are going to be, like, expedient, practically speaking, for the early to mid game, but once you come into the late game, they start becoming a lot less useful. Let's get into their traits. The first off is they tax avoidance, which is, you know, it's bad. You get a manufacturing tax income malice. Notably, this is doubled because these guys are powerful, so it's minus 10% normally. If you, then the next one is engines of progress, which gives minus to production technology cost. All of the technology cost decreases ones are very, very, very solid, you know, bonuses. This will help you out early on, especially if you really wanted to try and, like, min-max the game. What you could do is you could juggle technology completions to about 80% or so, and then pull off of it until you get, you know, one of these guys powerful, and then you get minus, you'll just auto-finish the tech. But this is probably a little bit too deep in the tank. But for the most part, minus on production tech cost is very, very strong early game because, generally speaking, I think you should be researching mostly production techs in the early to mid game, and so this will help with that. And then finally, we have job creators, which is very powerful. It gives you plus 20% capitalist investment pool contribution. This is likely to change in patch 1.2 with some of the changes they're discussing, but for now, increasing the capital investment pool is pretty big because investment pool is what allows you to construct, and as we talked about earlier, a good way to think of construction is your total GDP. This will give you a lot more pool transfer, or it'll give you a lot more investment pool, and notably, this is a flat effect. So if you have no investment pool transfer from your law system, like, for example, if you're still on traditionalism, the capitalists will still contribute to the investment pool if they are happy with you and they are powerful enough. So, generally speaking, you want to try and get the industrialists powerful early game, and then you just kind of lean into them. You use them for a very large bonus on the investment pool contribution. You build a ton, and this is very powerful interest group. So, practically speaking, very, very good. The reason why they're not as good, like, theoretically speaking, is because there are better bonuses out there. But in terms of practice, you have to get these guys powerful to pass all the good laws. And so we're with it, is the word. In third place, we have the Intelligentsia, who is second place, theoretically, but practically speaking, we put them into third place because the Industrialists play such an important part, you know, in terms of reforming in the early to mid game. For their traits, we have social criticism, minus on prestige. This isn't too bad in malice, so if you want to make these guys pissed, you can. We have avant-garde, which gives minus 20% society tech cost. Again, very, very solid. Society tech, I think, is one of the more powerful techs or branches. I think that production is the best branch, society is the second best branch, and military is the worst branch, largely because you can be behind in mil tech and just bring a much bigger stick, and the AI doesn't use timing windows. So what I mean by that is, if you just have a way bigger economy, you can have a way bigger military if you want, and then the AI will not kind of wait to finish a tech and then attack you aggressively. The AI is not that aggressive currently in patch 1.1, and it's like affiliate sub-patches, and so you don't have to worry about getting attacked too much unless you're Mexico playing against the US, and so generally speaking, you can let stuff wait on the mil tech. You just get a bigger stick and then you whack them with the bigger stick. And finally, we have the really, 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 really powerful, this might be the best bonus in the game. It's just that the trade unionists have two really good bonuses. It's close between this one and the trade union's second bonus, but plus 50% migration attraction. Migration is super, super overtuned. This will allow you to pull a lot of people into your country, which will have a cascading, like, it'll have a ton of positive effects by having more people. You can build more and still have all those buildings be profitable and have the labor be not super expensive. And, you know, it's just a very, very powerful effect. It will mean it will change the equilibrium that you're pulling towards in terms of, like, how high you have to raise the standard of living in order to get more migrants. It'll pull it down quite a bit, which will allow you to get a lot of migrants while being really profitable at the same time, which is just like a tremendously powerful effect. It especially early on. Also, in terms of practically speaking, the Intelligentsia paired with the Industrialists is kind of your go-to for passing a whole bunch of laws. You know, the Intelligentsia get all the liberal reforms, the Industrialists get all the economic reforms. They're in agreement on some laws, like the particularly nasty serfdom law, you know, in labor rights, is opposed by both the Industrialists and the Intelligentsia. So practically speaking, the Intelligentsia is also really good. You know, they support both multiculturalism and total separation and no migration, or they don't support no migration controls, but I believe the Industrialists do. Yes, the Industrialists do. So together, you know, you can get multiculturalism, total separation, no migration controls. All these are really overpowered or really powerful because migration is overtuned. So for an early to mid-game strategy, it makes sense to bolster the Intelligentsia and the Industrialists. Okay, next up we have the rural folks in 4th place, and I had them in 3rd place on the abstract when talking about their bonuses. So for their malice, they have minus tech spread in old ways. This is a pretty significant malice if you are playing not as like one of the really high-tech great powers like Great Britain, France, Prussia, Austria. If you're not playing as one of these countries, this malice is pretty big because tech spread is a very important modifier. It becomes less important the more ahead of time you are in tech, because sometimes you're not actually even getting the tech spread. And okay, it's a malice. For here we have honest work, 10% logging, 10% agriculture, 10% ranches. This is a pretty strong bonus. Notably, it would be doubled if these guys were powerful. They're not powerful though. And so this is a strong bonus. This bonus gets better and better the later the game gets, as you are stripping the world of more and more of its resources. Bonuses like this that allow you to get more out of your rural stuff become much bigger, especially the logging industry throughput. I find in almost all my games I run a hardwood shortage no matter how much I conquer, and so this is going to be good for that, which will allow you to, you know, build more furniture manufactories before you run a shortage, which will allow you to, you know, push up your standard of living, decrease the costs of the goods for your lower strata, like this sort of thing. This is very good. And finally, we have Farmers Market, which is an incredible bonus. Keep in mind, it's doubled if these guys were powerful for plus 10% infrastructure or plus 20% infrastructure. This is an insane bonus. This is really, really, really strong. It's not strong just because you get to build more infrastructure. It's like kind of strong in two ways. One, you build fewer infrastructure early on. Early on, this bonus would be absolutely incredible because you are expanding your base infrastructure largely, not your railroad infrastructure. Like if you take a look at any one of these places, most of our infrastructure here is coming from railroads, right? Not just the base amount. But this expanding the base amount is really, really strong early game for the plus infrastructure because it means you do not have to build as many railroads and you don't have to build railroads as early. Late game, it gets super powerful because often late game you are paying a huge amount in subsidies to your railroads because you have to build so many railroads to get all the infrastructure. If you increase infrastructure by 20%, you know, it will more than 20% reduce the amount you're paying in subsidies, which is really substantive, and also you have to build fewer railroads, so this allows you to build more like manufactories, which make more money, you know, which has like a compounding effect, because if you get more manufactories earlier, you make more money earlier, you can expand construction earlier. The problem with all this earlier business is that the rural folk are generally pretty hard to get in power early, and they also oppose a lot of really useful reforms. Namely, they like oppose like laissez-faire pretty strongly. They also oppose open borders. And so the rural folk are hard to get in power early, and they are also will oppose a lot of useful stuff early, so they become more of a late game interest group, but they're still really, really good, and so this is why I have them, you know, in 4th place behind the Intelligentsia, even though their bonuses are really good. They would be tremendously good early if they didn't interfere with a lot of the laws you're trying to pass. Okay, next up, let's talk about the armed forces and their bonuses. So you have material waste as their malice, which is plus 25% military goods cost. This malice can be really, really bad early on in the game when you are paying. So early on, if you have to fight early, generally speaking, your goods for your military buildings will actually be pretty expensive relative to all of your expenses if you're trying to use the latest and greatest tech. And if you are running this malice, it hurts a lot. And if you're running this malice doubled, it hurts a lot. So this is kind of something to be avoided, but it's really easy to be avoided. Next up, we have, minus mil tech cost. I discussed before. The minus tech cost bonuses are pretty solid. It's a good bonus. I think that this is the worst of them because generally speaking, I think that you can kind of hold off on military tech a little bit and just try and get a bigger stick. But this bonus is great. And then we have patriotic fervor, which gives plus 15% offense and defense. This is a very solid bonus. If you're close in a war, being able to turn this on makes a huge difference. And just trying to turn it on. One of the reasons that the armed forces is kind of higher up here, it is ranked 5 on, practically speaking, and 7 theoretically speaking, is because it is very easy to have the armed forces happy, and it is very easy to have the armed forces just kind of chilling with whatever you're doing. It's not very restrictive. They don't really oppose the laws too much that you are interested in, and they kind of support a couple laws that are pretty good. Like, I think armed forces is one of the better ones, professional army is one of the better armed forces, army models, and also dedicated police force is one of the better ones. But for the most part, they're pretty chill, they're pretty neutral as an interest group, they're not gonna hamstring you, and so for this reason they get 5th. Alright, now we have 6th in Petite Bourgeoisie, who, in my opinion, should be 5th in terms of bonuses. The Petite Bourgeoisie's bonuses are pretty good. Let's take a look at them. So we have xenophobia as their malice. Xenophobia is pretty annoying if you have any discrimination in your country. Plus 100% radicals from discrimination when doubled to plus 200% radicals from discrimination. If the Petite Bourgeoisie are powerful and they're mad at you and you have a lot of discrimination, man, does this hurt. You also get decreased influence. Influence isn't too important, or the influence bonuses is it's not that big a deal. You can just declare more rivals, whatever. Here we have middle managers. Now, middle managers gives plus 10% bureaucracy, just alongside the rural folk, alongside their bonuses for plus infrastructure. This is one that's pretty solid. It's not as good as the rural folks bonus, but it's really annoying when you lose it and you had it before. It's annoying with the rural folk when you suddenly have 10% less infrastructure or even 20% less infrastructure. That hurts a lot. Getting a minus on bureaucracy also hurts a lot because it tends to take you into a malice. If you're running a negative bureaucracy, this is really bad because it leads to tax waste. Tax waste notably is just money that gets destroyed. If you tax your pops less, you're giving money back to your pops. Your pops can spend more, it drives consumption, it makes your businesses more profitable. If you are running a tax, if you have the tax malice, I forget what it's called, I just mentioned it earlier, but you will the money gets deleted. It still gets taken away from your pops if you're running negative bureaucracy. The money still gets taken away from your pops, but you just lose it. It doesn't go into your coffers, it doesn't go to your pops, it's just deleted. And so running negative bureaucracy is really bad, and so while this bonus is, it's okay, when you lose this bonus, it's really annoying. So if you are going to play with the Petite Bourgeoisie and make them happy, you have to make sure you keep an eye on how happy they are and the bureaucracy. This level of micromanagement is a little bit annoying. I wish it was not like a light switch, instead like a volume knob, and it just slowly trended towards this 10% thing. This would be a little bit better in terms of gameplay, but it's a solid bonus. I don't think it's quite as good as the tech, but just about kind of in there. Now, here we have minus loan interest rate. Deficit spending with laissez-faire currently is really strong, and deficit spending with laissez-faire and treasury bonds basically makes it so that you just get a ton of free money to up construction. Remember, construction is a good way to think of your country as GDP growth. So the more construction you have, the more GDP growth you have. If you just get to deficit spend a whole bunch, this country is a bad example because we're really late game, although it's only 76. Its deficit spending is really powerful if you can stack this minus loan interest rate modifier, because what will happen is your country Well, so we have gold reserves equal to 282 million. So that means we would have a credit line of around 800 million in this country. You can just run up and spend a whole really, really deep into your credit, and not have to suffer too big a penalty. And what will happen is you will pay interest, but this interest is decreased by the loan interest rate. It'll be decreased by 20% if the petite bourgeoisie is powerful. It will be decreased further by laissez-faire, giving them minus 25% loan interest rate. And you also have laws that give minus loan interest rate. And if you are a great power, you also get minus loan interest rate, or your interest rate, like your natural interest rate, is much lower. So if you combine all these things, deficit spending is incredibly powerful because it allows you to, for example, here, we would just be able to leverage, 500 million in deficit in order to construct way more. And so the petite bourgeoisie is really a strong interest group. It gets less powerful, practically speaking, because they support, all the repressive liberal policies. And since migration is so powerful, the fact that they oppose multiculturalism and sometimes oppose, total separation, depending on kind of what happens, they tend to align themselves more often in terms of their ideology with these sorts of things. We'll talk about ideologies more later. They also oppose free speech and like these types of things. Generally speaking, they kind of oppose a lot of laws you might be interested in. They support going back up the chain often, in terms of moving towards, autocracy, especially if you get the fascists. Same with government principles, moving more back towards monarchy. So sometimes you actually want their support, but often because of the laws they support, they get knocked down a peg from 5th to 6th. All right, next we have the church, which has the biggest difference between how good they are practically speaking and how good they are or theoretically speaking. So the church's bonuses are, if you're running the malice, you get minus education access. This is a pretty annoying malice. Education increases literacy. Literacy drives how much you research. This is pretty annoying. It gets doubled again if you have them powerful. And then next up we have plus 10% authority. This is a really nice bonus, especially for the just plus 5 one. This is really strong. And it's, you get to suppress and bolster with authority. You get to run extra consumption taxes. You get to run edicts. And so this is a really powerful thing. The edicts are really powerful. The suppressing and bolstering allows you to kind of micromanage where your interest group clout is at. And this is just a very strong bonus. This might be the strongest plus 5 bonus. It's tough because the trade unionist one is also so strong. But the manufacturing, I think the throughput's probably a little bit better, but it's pretty close. Especially if you wanted to run a more rural economy, because the trade unionists only give to the manufacturing throughput. And then finally we are looking at these guys. And then finally, you get 2% birth rate, which is a very strong modifier, although generally speaking, you will be gaining most of your population through migration. And so this makes birth rate less important, which is why laws like, women's suffrage are good, which decrease birth rate but give you workforce ratio, which, as we discussed, is a really strong modifier. And, child labor is bad, and instead you want to go on this. Generally speaking, we want to be on more the migration path. Now, if you're playing a country like, let's get back to our guys. If you're playing a country like China, or just a really high population country, this bonus gets a lot better, because if you are relying on birth rate, this bonus starts to get really big. Also, China is a really unique one because they don't suffer the major disadvantage of why the church is generally bad, which is that the church supports stuff that you want to get rid of, often speaking, like the more repressive policies, and the church and the intelligentsia don't jive together. They oppose each other, and so generally speaking, the 50% migration, I think, is better than the 2% birth rate, and since you often cannot have both these guys happy at the same time, it's really difficult to pass laws that make them happy, and also almost all the laws the intelligentsia support, the church will oppose, like this is, and vice versa, this type of thing. So as a consequence of that, I think the church is really bad, which drops them into 7th place. And it's largely just on the back of them and the Intelligentsia not getting along, which isn't the case with China's interest groups. So China, you can play a little bit different, but for the most part, I think the Intelligentsia is really good. And so because they are often at odds with the church, and the fact that the church doesn't want to go migration, I think that this makes the church pretty bad. And when I say they don't want to go migration, I mean they don't want to go total separation, which is needed to really pump up the migration numbers. And also private schools is good. You could go religious schools if you wanted to go religion. Also, discrimination as a mechanic does drive up a ton of radicals, which, as we will discuss, is pretty bad when it comes to, trying to get the interest groups happy with you. And finally, we have last up the landowners and their bonuses. Okay, let's just talk into them. The malice is kind of annoying. It's minus 10% on agriculture and ranching and plantation tax income. It's not that big a deal. In general, let's get through them and then we'll talk about it. Influence, not really that big a bonus. It's okay. I think this might be one of the worst, actually, of the 5% bonuses, but, like, you're happy to have it when you get it. It's not, like, bad. It's a bonus. And then aristocrats investment pool contribution plus 10%. The aristocrats don't give much to begin with, but the 10% is flat, important to remember. So this bonus in some sense is just as good as, the laissez-faire, or sorry, not the laissez-faire, the industrialist one. But in general, I think that you want to not have an agrarian economy, and you want to go industrial as quickly as possible, and every bonus that these guys give you basically only applies to rural areas, and so as a consequence, I think that these guys are really not very useful. The aristocrats investment pool contribution isn't very useful when you're trying to import, like, all your fabric and your silk and your dyes, and this minus tax income is not that bad when you're not leaning too much on those anyways. And a big reason why you are doing this is because the laws that these guys support are all generally kind of bad. If we go into the laws section, they like serfdom, they don't like laissez-faire, and they will often get in your way. Although if you go through the Corn Laws event chain, you will get a market liberal landowner who does support laissez-faire. This is a very strong early game to do with a variety of runs, but for the most part, the bonuses aren't that great if you're going industrial. Industrial is way better than agrarian, and so you just kind of don't want these guys to be up in there. They will also have really low clout. It will be hard to keep their clout high unless you keep laws that are, like, not very good. I suppose you can stay on monarchy or something for the increased, political strength. There's a variety of these that give increased political strength, but they're just, like, not very good. Hereditary bureaucrats gives them political strength, not very good. I suppose the local police force actually is decent because it decreases turmoil by the most. So you can get minus 100% state penalties from turmoil with the local police force, and if you did want to kind of go, this would be the best law to have on them, but for the most part, they get in your way in terms of laws that you want. You want to go industrial anyways, so their bonuses aren't that great. I mean, 10% from it's certainly not bad, the 10% from the landowners, but overall, not where you want to be. You generally want to kind of get this group into marginalized as quickly as possible, because almost everything you do is going to make them mad. And so this has just been a quick rundown of the bonuses, which ones I think are best, why I think they're best, and which interest groups I think are best in this sort of thing. I'm just going to very quickly go back through it. I think that practically speaking, I think theoretically speaking, the best from first to last is first place is trade unionists. Both their bonuses are really good. They're just very, 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 very good. Like the throughput bonus alongside the workforce ratio, really powerful. Also, they kind of have some laws you want to pass, notably, if you want to try and get a bigger control of the pie, proportional taxation often gets you a lot of money, which allows you to construct. You could stay on per capita, but okay, you need the trade unions to pass this law specifically. So, this is them practically speaking, but theoretically speaking, they're also quite strong. Next up, Intelligentsia is just in the abstract going to be the second best group because migration is so strong is the practical reason as well for them. Rural folk I have third for practically speaking because you know, the infrastructure bonus is very strong. It is annoying when you lose it. Church I have in 4th%, because their bonuses are really good. This birth rate and authority, both fantastic. Petite Bourgeoisie we have in 5th, for theoretically speaking, because the deficit spending strategy is a strong one. Industrialists we have in 6th. The increased capitalist investment pool contribution is pretty big. Maybe the Industrialists deserve a little bit more love. I think that the Petite Bourgeoisie kind of edged them out, but you can make an argument either way. Petite Armed Forces is next. It's mainly the Miltech cost. I generally think most of the time you're going to a war, you're going to have a way bigger stick, and offense and defense isn't going to matter. But if you can just quickly nab the patriotic fervor, it's pretty good. And then last place we have Landowners, because they support going agrarian, and right now agrarian sucks. So let's talk about just real quick rundown of practically speaking again. Trade unionists are best. They support a lot of laws that are important, and their bonuses are just the best. Then industrialists, mainly because you're going to need to lean on them in the early to mid game, and they pass a bunch of laws that you want, and these 20% capitalist investment pool contribution is pretty good, and it's pretty easy to get. Then we have Intelligentsia, practically speaking. Migration attraction is really powerful. A lot of this is just on the back of this migration modifier being really good, but also this, and also them combined with the industrialists will kind of pass all the laws you want in the early game. And then we have the rural folk, who are not very strong in the early game, practically speaking hard to get, but these bonuses are quite strong if you can get them powerful. Next we have armed forces, which is just kind of neutral. It's easy to get their stuff, and you know, the tech cost is pretty good. The patriotic fervor is nice, and you can sometimes access it like relatively easy. And then we have the Petite Bourgeoisie. The deficit spending is really good. Unfortunately, they like a bunch of laws that I think are bad, and so this is kind of why they get kicked down here. Then we have the church. Their bonuses are really good, but it drops them all the way into 7th place from 4th, because they oppose the Intelligentsia, and if you're going to have just one, you're going to have the Intelligentsia. And then in last place, we have the Landowners, just because they kind of suck. So this has been the bonuses, which ones I think are best, and then we're going to come back in just a second with, you know, kind of a detailed explanation of other things. And we'll get okay, so we talked about which interest groups were best, which ones had the best bonuses, and which ones were practically speaking the best. Now it's time to talk about what the general strategy should be. I think the general strategy should be to keep 2 to 3 interest groups as powerful, and then try and also keep them happy. And so in order to do this, we need to talk a little bit about how do we massage them into being powerful, and how do we massage them into being happy, this type of thing, and also achieving a balance. Let's just talk about clout real quick. Generally speaking, clout is determined in large part by money, but if we take a look, it's going to be affected hugely by our laws. If we have, you know, autocracy, for example, this gives clout, just gives flat political strength to aristocrats. Now, aristocrats are a type of owner of a building. Generally speaking, the building owners are going to be the ones that make the big bucks, and so when you are deciding, you know, which buildings to build, knowing what the owners are is going to make a big difference. For example, the cotton plantations here, if we have it on privately owned, they will be owned by aristocrats who, if we hover over, are primarily landowners. They're landed gentry because we're playing the UK. If we switch to publicly traded, for example, now they'll be partially owned by capitalists. And the capitalists also tend to be, well, they're mostly industrialists, but they also tend to be quite a bit intelligentsia. This is why one of the reasons why going intelligentsia / capitalist early on is so good, because you can just build a whole bunch of manufacturing to increase their clout and focus on that. If we look at, you know, the manufacturing buildings, they are entirely capitalists, not a split between capitalists and landowners, and they will be primarily industrialists and intelligentsia. So it will be easy to get the owners of the building powerful. Now, if we take a look at distribution of power, the further down you go, the less important ownership becomes, and the more important just having a ton of pops of that group is, because things will be decided more by voting, and you'll also tend to get more clout into other interest groups, such as, you know, the rural folk, the ones that aren't owning the buildings. But generally speaking, if you want to expand the clout of, you know, the intelligentsia and for example, the intelligentsia and the industrialists, going manufacturing is good. If you want to expand landed gentry, you know, going more rural is good. You will also take note of some PMs. Like, for example, in the universities, you can go secular academia, which goes academics, which tend to be more intelligentsia than other things. And clerical educators, for example, I don't think we have much clergymen, but they will be primarily church-oriented, although here we have suppressed the church quite a bit, and so they're primarily rural folk in our case, and landed gentry. So you want to just pay attention to your PMs, what type of people they're hiring. For example, you know, when you start switching a lot to machinists and get later on, machinists tend to be more trade unionists, right, than laborers who they replace, often. So see 70% versus 54%, so paying attention to which interest groups this is sort of thing. Pops will vote if they have money, so as standard of living rises, you know, the poorer interest group types tend to become more powerful. If we take a look here, go into population tab and go to detailed list, we'll see the ... means politically inactive. So our laborers, they're only making 21, they tend to be politically inactive. These guys making 24, they tend to be trade unionists or politically inactive. And we'll see that as they start coming up and becoming more affluent, they tend to start becoming more politically active. And so the standard of living will greatly affect clout, because as they're more politically active and also as your laws allow them to vote, this will make a difference. They tend to vote more when they're educated as well. Once we switch to universal suffrage, a lot of our other pops, like the rural folk pops, will become politically active. I believe this is on an equilibrium, so it'll take a while. It won't be like a light switch, but I'm not 100% sure with that. I've just swapped laws before and then not had a big clout change, but we'll see. Okay, so we talked about ownership, wealth, and the duel event. So this is kind of just a quick ideas on how to increase the clout. With the last caveat here, there is a way to increase clout very directly, which you can bolster and suppress in order to try and keep the party happy. So right now, we are bolstering the Industrialists because we were keeping them fairly happy, but we might make a pivot, you know, to the rural folk here because we're kind of switching gears and looking to go into sort of a later game thing. The Industrialists aren't very important now, and so we would just take this off, go stop bolstering, you know, and then go to the rural folk and go to bolster here, in order to try and bring their clout up above 20 and maintain it above 18 once it's above 20, so that we double all the bonuses they're giving. And if these guys dip below 20, we're getting less of the malice. So this is good. Now, let's talk about approval, because we already talked a little bit about, you know, trying to get them in power. Now let's talk about getting them happy. So if you hover over, the game is actually pretty transparent in terms of how you are getting your guys happy, and so this is a good thing. You'll notice that a big part of it is just a static effect on the laws that you have. Having laws that are kind of consistent with the interest groups makes them much more easygoing, but a big part of understanding this, or a big part that contributes to this, is going to be the ideologies of the individuals. So for example, Vanguardists oppose and support a whole bunch of laws specifically. Same with pacifists, and they relate to their ideologies. So oftentimes, you will get event chains, and there's like 3 kind of like big interest group ideology event chains. You will, kind of early on in the game, you will get one where everyone goes radical. And if everyone's radical, it is generally pretty easy to maintain a really high approval rating if you just go radical laws. And so we will see that they support, you know, universal suffrage, protected speech, guaranteed liberties. So if you go in this direction, you pass a bunch of their laws, it's pretty easy to keep them loyal. So this is kind of the first and most basic way of keeping them loyal. It is not the most powerful. Also, just passing laws straight up that they support. You notice they are supporting our current law change and also law changes we made in the past, from wage subsidies to old age pension, but they oppose women's suffrage here. And so this will make a huge effect on the approval rating, the law you are currently passing. This is one of the larger effects that you can affect on approval rating. So sometimes, you know, you just want to put laws on the back burner just to not make people mad. An example of this is, for the most part, for welfare, let's say I don't care too much, you know, between poor laws, wage subsidies, old age pension, they're all kind of close. For a long time in this run, I did not swap off of poor laws to wage subsidies because I just barely had 10 approval on the Industrialists, and I wanted to make sure I was getting the job creators bonus. And so, you know, kind of paying a little bit of attention to the clout in terms of when you are passing laws is something you can do to try and make sure, or not the clout, the approval. Finally, the last thing is legitimacy, or loyalists, which we'll get to involves legitimacy. You can get up to 15 plus 15 approval, which is huge, if you have a lot of loyalists, and it's based on the percentage. So if we take a look here, we will see. Oh no, okay, I guess we have to look here through the tooltip. So we will see the amount of extra approval that we are getting from our loyalists. It can go all the way up to 15, depending on the percentage that have a lot of clout that are happy with you. So the Industrialists are pretty happy with us regardless, because we have a whole bunch of 83%. Let's get the tooltip back. 83% of the political strength in the interest group is loyalist. The cap is 15 if you get 100% of the interest group loyalists. A lot of these guys are loyalists because their standard of living is so high because they are the owners of buildings. So this is pretty good for us. So despite the fact that we are like getting minus 20 from trying to do a law, we don't have these guys radicalizing. We're just getting a bad bonus. And once we finish trying to pass the law, we will get a decaying effect, and we will probably get back up to 10 happiness with these guys and get them in job creators. We might even want to try and have 4 interest groups powerful at the same time. We got to weaken the trade unions a little, or the Petite Bourgeoisie and armed forces, something like this. But this is going to be a big effect, which raises the question, how do you get loyalists? There's a lot of different ways you get loyalists. Just briefly talking about it though, the kind of 2 biggest ones, if you have an increasing standard of living, this is a good way to get loyalists. If you are avoiding having big political movements that are going against you, this is a good way to get loyalists. But one of the bigger and easier ways is to have a ton of legitimacy. If you have a really legitimate government, you will start getting loyalists. If you have a hyper legitimate, it goes up even more. And if you have an illegitimate, you will get radicals, which have the opposite effect of loyalists here. And so, generally speaking, a bunch of radicals makes you lose all these bonuses. These bonuses are really strong. You kind of want to maintain it. Well, okay, so other than this, how can we maintain legitimacy? Lately, I've been playing around with something that I think should be kind of removed from the game, or kind of changed, which is you can just grab the Forbidden City up in this bizzle. And the Forbidden City is just a really overpowered building. You just snap it up from China, and then it gives you, in addition to plus 50 authority, it's modified, by the way, by this throughput bonus, which it shouldn't be, but it is. In addition to plus 50 authority, it gives plus 22 legitimacy. This makes it really easy to have a legitimate government here. Now, other ways you look at having a legitimate government is you have to go into your distribution of power laws. And you will see, for example, in autocracy, it's just all based on government clout. And same with oligarchy, although oligarchy lets you have more people in the government. And so, generally speaking, it's easier to maintain legitimacy with oligarchy than autocracy. Although, if just one person has most of the clout, autocracy tends to be pretty good. You will notice that voting tends to trend from having high clout to having a lot of votes. When you are splitting a bunch of interest groups kind of clout, as we are here, in a bunch of different spots, generally speaking, voting becomes better. So if you want to harvest a lot of different bonuses from your interest groups and have them powerful, you will probably have to switch to something that's getting a lot of the legitimacy from votes. So here, even if we don't have a lot of legitimacy from the clout, we will be getting it from the votes. We just put whoever wins the vote in power. I think there should be a system for them changing what the laws are based on who gets into power, but currently you just, put in the people who won the election, you get a ton of legitimacy, and then you're all happy. One of the reasons we've stayed on wealth voting for so long is because the bonus we're getting from the Forbidden City, but now we're not able to maintain righteous. Another way to also keep the government really, really legitimate is you get a malice for government ideology. If all these people have a different idea of which laws are best, then you will run a penalty. One way to avoid this penalty is, as we mentioned earlier, the ideologies. If everyone has the same ideology, you tend to have a very legitimate government. So going down the tracks of the radical event chain, the communist event chain, or the fascist event chain will tend to make you a much more legitimate government in the long run once you get through the bumps along the road, let's say. So this is a good way to also get the legitimacy up. And so you either want to go communist or fascist late game oftentimes to try and make sure you're maximally getting these bonuses. That way if you stay in righteous, for the most part, you will be getting like roughly plus 10 approval on all of your guys. And so this is probably the easiest way to try and farm that. And then you just stop, once you stop passing laws, it's kind of just all loyalists all the time. And your people generally are pretty happy. So just real quick recap of the strategy here, or what I think is strong to do. I think early game, you go Intelligentsia Industrialists, and you do quick reforms, and because they will support everything you want, and you bolster both of these interest groups, and you just plow through all of the laws you want, and then late game, you start to develop a little bit more slowly, you pass laws more slowly, and then you look to add kind of a third interest group in terms of who's powerful, generally the trade unionists, and maybe the rural folk if you can. Petite Bourgeoisie is a fine one, because this bonus is quite good. But with the third interest group, you try and get it powerful, you bolster that interest group, and then you try and maintain a really legitimate government by having a bunch of loyalists. One way to do this is to switch to a kind of more voting system, because you are splitting clout quite wide between a bunch of different groups in order to try and farm their bonuses at the doubled rate. And so this is kind of what you'd start doing in the mid to late game in terms of the proper way to play, in my opinion. If you want to just stay on 2 interest groups, however, you can stay in one of these upper echelons and just focus on keeping them strong. Also, if you really want to keep the industrialists strong, staying on landed voting or oligarchy is a good shout. But I think that transitioning from industrialists to rural folk, as we are doing here in this run, is probably a pretty strong way to go. But you just, keep 200 authority around to either bolster or suppress as needed. We are bolstering here the rural folk in this game. This will help you, try and massage it so that these interest groups are happy. Any more than 3, I think, is really hard to maintain and requires too much authority. But you could go for it. I tried to get 5 in a run, and I wasn't able to do it. But this is also something you could go for. But that's the strategy. You try and keep the legitimacy high. This is a big part of it. You try and make sure you build ownership of the buildings and use the various PMs such that you are kind of employing the people you want. So, for example, if we were trying to tone down the industrialists, we could switch to privately owned in a bunch of things. And you just... Managing the clout is kind of like is a bit of a different video, but keeping the approval high really is about the legitimacy and, having coherent laws and maybe just going all radical, all, communist and all fascist. That way all your interest groups will tend to fall into that, except for there are some restrictions, although you do want feminists at some point. But yeah, this is the strategy. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, or share. And if you have any suggestions for things you want tutorials on, please let me know, because I only have like 2 ideas left, and I'm trying to do 2 of these a week, so that's only a week worth of ideas. And have a good day. If you've been sitting a while, because this video is quite long, feel free to, get up, stretch, take a walk, these sorts of things, and have a whoopsie, I forgot 2 things, as well as maybe something I wanted to emphasize. So the 2 things is, it's also really easy to keep I'll put these both in the comments. It's easy to keep a legitimate government if you keep taxes low. And so oftentimes, in the early to mid game, you kind of want to increase or decrease taxes in a way that is sensitive to these thresholds here, because passing from the threshold to illegitimate, unacceptable, contested, legitimate, it is very a light switch type of thing. It's not a volume knob. So we could, for example, increase taxes here and still be in our same government tier. We could increase taxes twice and we would still be legitimate because we're over 75. So oftentimes you will want to increase or decrease in a fine-tuned way in order to maintain high legitimacy to generate these loyalists. And the second thing is you can get +2 approval on both the Petite Bourgeoisie or on all of the Petite Bourgeoisie, the Intelligentsia, and the armed forces just by paying them more. So if we take a look here, also this is often something you want to do if the armed forces are almost +10 happy and you have a kind of risky war. What you can do is you can increase the government wages in their particular sphere, which will have an effect. And on top of that, so in this case it's 10% authority and 20% morale recovery, but on top of that, it will also increase the wages and the approval rating. So this is another way to easily harvest the approval rating of these interest groups. Now, the thing I just wanted to emphasize before I go again, which I already did the outro, my editing skills aren't that good, so I'm probably just going to put this at the end of the thing. But a lot of times, a lot of the loyal approvals will be on a decaying thing. So a lot of events have a decaying effect. And just kind of important to emphasize, when you pass a law, it has a decaying effect. These guys will actually be unhappy because of something. So, for example, the recent change was a -5 and it decays. And so just keeping an eye on the decaying effects and these sorts of things might be something you want to do or be aware of that is usually on a decaying spectrum for a variety of things. But yeah, passing a law itself is really what kills or approves, makes a huge amount of approval, but then the decaying effect will go away, or it's just something to keep in mind. Anyways, I already said the outro. I'm not saying it again. You can't make me do it.